Welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, a large lorry plowed through packed crowds celebrating the Bastille Day in Nice, taking more than 80 lives in the latest terrorist attack in France. Will it ever end? China's economy grows slightly ahead of the expected figure for the second quarter, but shows no signs of regaining the crucial spring in its step. What's next? And in the movie industry dominated by Hollywood animation flicks, rock dog movie investor Deng Feng shares about the challenges for Chinese animators in forging the path forward. We begin in the southern French city of Nice, where a truck loaded with weapons and hand grenades plowed through crowds of people celebrating the Bastille Day on Thursday evening. French police has identified the driver as a 31-year-old French-Tunisian, a resident of Nice himself. The Interior Ministry says at least 84 people were killed, including many children. A dozen others are in critical condition right now in the hospital. Police shot dead the driver of the truck, and surveillance cameras caught the moment of the truck rushing to the crowd before the attack. France has been badly plagued by the deadly attacks in the past 2 years. There is a recap of major attacks and failed attempts since the Charlie Hebdo shooting in January 2015.
France's recent spike in terror attacks started in January 2015, when gunmen burst into the offices of the satirical French magazine Charlie Hebdo. They killed 11 people in the office before shooting a policeman dead in the streets outside. Over the next 2 days, another 5 people were killed in coordinated attacks, 4 of them during a siege at a Jewish supermarket in the east of Paris. In August, 3 Americans and a Briton thwarted a potentially deadly attack on board a high-speed train. An armed gunman injured 3 people before he was subdued on a high-speed train on its way to Paris from Amsterdam. The gunman is identified by intelligence services with links to radical Islam. In November, Islamic State jihadists launched a series of coordinated attacks in the French capital that left 130 people dead. 2 suicide bombers blew themselves up outside a stadium during a football match between France and Germany. Others attacked 2 restaurants in the city, killing dozens. The majority of the victims were at the Bataclan concert hall, where several gunmen shot randomly at the crowd before taking dozens hostage. The most recent attack in Nice happened just hours after France announced that the state of emergency declared after last November's attacks would come to an end later this month. This was because a new law bolstering security was adopted in May, allowing the government to monitor individuals administratively. Speaking during a press conference after the attack, President François Hollande has extended the state of emergency in the country.
I've also decided the state of the emergency that was supposed to be lifted on the 26th July will be extended by 3 months. This will be put before our parliament next week. Nothing will make us yield in our will to fight terrorism. We will further strengthen our actions in Iraq and in Syria. We will continue striking those who attack us on our own soil.
For more on the Nice attack, we are joined here in our Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, Director of the European Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir. Also joining us from Paris, Mr. Joab Toker, Professor at the American Graduate School in Paris. First of all, condolences to many of those who passed away during this terrorist attack. Professor Toker, you're joining us from Paris. May I ask you about this? The third big terrorist attack within 19 months. Many people, both inside France and outside your country, have been asking the question, why? Again, what do you make of it?
France has always been all the way up on the list of targets when it comes to the radical Islamic terrorism list and logic. Now, there are 2 basic set of reasons for that. One of them is indeed anchored in our high politics, in international politics. France is active on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq fighting ISIL. France is active on several African fronts, fighting in Mali, in Central Africa, and elsewhere against the same kind of overall radical Islam movement. But I would say that what happened tragically last night in Nice, over that Promenade des Anglais horrible massacre, is to be explained more by the fact of what is happening in France itself. Namely, proportionally, France is the #1, or rather #2 per capita in terms of the dimensions of the Muslim immigrant or immigrant-issued population. So the potential internally in France for mobilization and for radicalization, which might turn into violent forms, is statistically, numerically higher. That explains why the target on one hand sets what is on the ISIL mind and ISIL and associates, if I may say so. And that explains also why is it that over French territory we have so many and so frequently those horrible tragic events.
Mr. Cui, here in Beijing, at this moment we do not know any terrorist organizations has ever claimed the responsibility so far. We do not know whether it's really linked to ISIL, as Professor Joab Toker just indicated. But what do you make of it? Again, 19 months, the third biggest, killing now more than 200 altogether.
Yeah. So firstly, very sorry for this, very sad incident in Nice in France. You know, as a research fellow in China, I do have some French friends. Yeah, very, bad feeling about this incident. But of course, now I think it's time for French government to review what happened, what's the policy or something else. I would like to add some real points on why always is France to be the target of the terrorism attack is. Because maybe, you know, in the past, always once there is a terrorism attack, the ISIL or some other terrorism organization would be, responsible for this attack. But this time, a little bit different. So I think now the very important change for this terrorism attack in France is we need to understand maybe more and more endogenic reasons, for example. Because maybe in the past, most of the terrorism attack is imported from other countries, from other part of the region. But this time, so far, no any evidence to say it's from other organization or other country. But if we know now, France is in a very difficult political and economic situation, we can understand maybe perhaps some people who felt frustrated, they want to do something to share something. So to show some, you know, very bad feeling. So I would like to say that it's good time for French government to understand, not always from outside, maybe inside.
Well, we have seen many of those incidents over the past few years, homegrown terrorism, both inside the United States and also in European continents as well. Having said that, though, Professor Toker, at this moment, the French government proposed two things. One is to extend the emergency plan, which had been in the country since the last terrorist attack in November. And secondly is to continue the intensive military patrol inside some of the major cities in France. Of course, that takes a lot of efforts, both of these two measures. Can they really continue? Are they sustainable? What about the government still hasn't figured it out? It's unfair to ask you just as an expert, but it is a fair question. I have to ask it.
It is a fair question, and it is also a very fair comment you made, both of you, in the studio in Beijing 3 minutes ago, stating that we assume right now that what happened in Nice last night indeed was linked to ISIL energy, although we do not have confirmation to that. The only confirmed element, seemingly, is the identity of the driver, of the person who was there, and who happens to be apparently a French-Tunisian citizen, namely a French citizen born in Tunisia, 31 years old. We do not have confirmation as to his potential links to ISIL. We don't know whether he was a lone wolf and operated alone. It would be difficult to suspect that, because he had a truck, he had some other equipment, he had fake weapons, etc. Now, when it comes to the question of the extension of the emergency state, how right you are, indeed, in saying that this is on the limit, on the borderline of sustainability. But in terms of practical mobilization and in terms of reserves, when it comes to French gendarmerie and police and special forces and special military units, it is feasible. It is feasible on the logistical side. How feasible would it be in terms of the political aspects and the fallout of all that? This indeed is a very good question and a very borderline one, because you can hear, although also over the last 24 hours in France itself, and not only within opposition leaders, criticism regarding the way the government is handling all that, in spite of the fact that not even a day has passed since the horrible massacre had taken place in southern France. So there would be over those lands some moving sands in the coming days.
Talking about politics, Professor Toker, next year, it is already the presidential election year in France. At this moment, if we talk too much politics, probably is inappropriate in face of such a crisis and crime, and yet it is very relevant because it could become a very important part of the presidential election party politics. To make of it, these series of terrorist attacks for the major candidates of these campaigns, and will those major candidates in the campaigns be able to bring some fresh ideas to the table to better protect the French people?
There is no doubt in my mind that those issues related to overall security, relations to the extreme radical Islam threat and what the government is doing or should be doing or was not doing, etc., would be a central issue in the presidential campaign. You see, by the way, what happens on the other side of the Atlantic in this sense. It's right, the same thing, although America had been spurred numerically, not into America had been victimized. Not as much, not as many victims as in
but
as in
Professor,
France.
my question
So
is
I'm
very
sure
specific. My question is very specific. How many candidates are already working very intensely on this terrorist issue? And how is it compared to the current president now in the office? How much will that eventually shape your presidential election? Some specific answers from you, sir.
As for the question, how many candidates are working at that, my answer would be all of them. We're speaking about 12 to 15, both on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, although not all of these 12 to 15 had officially declared their candidacy. So they're all working at it, that's for sure. The new thing, which I've gathered over the last 24 hours or so, is for the first time, very few hours after the hit, after the shock, after the trauma, you hear direct criticism regarding the performance of government and the military and police forces,
and of course
punctually regarding what could have been perhaps avoided.
This is very new. People are not trying to be quote-unquote politically correct anymore, even the candidates. So what do you think, Mr. Cui, observing from afar with many of friends in France, what would this mean for the political future of this country, and how would that link to the overall turmoil going on in some parts of Europe?
Yes, exactly. I think this incident will give a very, very negative impact on the political situation in France. As we know, next year there will be a presidential election. And even now, there are more and more, support from average people in France to this far-right political forces. So that's what problem is. Just like our French friends mentioned, that all politicians, they have to show their concern about this very, very serious issue, but they do have different solutions. For example, for the far-right political forces, they will strengthen their, slogan to say we should say no to European Union, we should say no to immigration, we should say no to outsiders. So that's a very, very big a problem for French politics and society.
Terrorist attacks like these make people feel powerless, but at the same time, they could also unite people for a better future. We'll see how they would be shaped politically and eventually its impact on the country of France and even bigger in the continent of Europe. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Once again, our condolences to the friends in France. Joab Toker from Paris, Cui Hongjian in China. Thank you so much for being with us. And now we take a look at a fresh official data coming from the Chinese side on the Chinese economy. Despite no acceleration in the growth for the first half of 2016, figures remained stable and within the government's target growth range. Other indicators also suggest continuing structural changes in China's economy. Let's take a look.
Keeping the pace. China's GDP grew 6.7% in the first half of 2016, the same speed as in the first quarter, which some believe is laying the foundation for achieving the year's growth target of 6.5 to 7%. On the bright side, industrial output expanded 6.2%. China's service sector expanded 7.5% year-on-year, accounting for 54.1% of the overall economy. Consumer goods retail sales also saw steady growth.
In the first half of 2016, China's retail sales of consumer goods was 15.6138 trillion yuan, a nominal increase of 10.3% or a real increase of 9.7% year-on-year. The growth rate stayed the same as that in the first quarter.
China aims to realize structural changes in its industry structure while maintaining stable growth. High-tech and equipment manufacturing both grew substantially higher than average in industrial sector, a structural trend experts like to see. However, growth of fixed asset investment slowed further to 9%. Experts say long-term overcapacity in industrial economy has led to bleak demand outlook, which has led privately owned manufacturers to cut spending on new factories and contributed partly to the sharp slowdown.
对，从上半年情况来看，民间投资增速还是在继续回落的。
Investment confidence is low because the investment threshold is too high, and that is still hard for small private companies to secure financing.
Despite that, a surge in infrastructure investment by SOE taken up the slack, supporting demand for commodities such as steel, copper, and cement. China churned out a record amount of crude steel in June, which some believe has fueled global steel overcapacity. On Wednesday, the EU leaders announced after meeting with Chinese leaders that they've agreed to form a working group to discuss China's steel production, an issue linked to whether EU leaders will grant market economy status to China. The status would open doors to more Chinese imports. But U.S. trade diplomat Chris Wilson has said that China's reforms so far have fallen short of expectations for market economy status. China's economy growth may be steady, but as downward pressure remains, more measures may be needed to boost the economy and meet both domestic and international expectations.
And for more on China's second quarter economic data, we are joined in our Beijing studio Xu Sitao, who's the chief economist at Deloitte China. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C., we're having Scott Kennedy, director of the Project on Chinese Business and Political Economy with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome as well. Gentlemen, let's start with this number. According to China's National Statistics Bureau, the growth of the first two quarters in the year 2016 stayed at 6.7, lower than the 6.8% of the fourth quarter of 2015, and the annual growth rate of the 2015 was 6.9. Over there, you can see those numbers. Some economists believe China's economy is following a L shape. So my question to both of you is, do you believe so? Let's start with Mr. Kennedy.
Well, I think growth has slowed. We have to remember that in English you can have two kinds of L's, an uppercase L and a lowercase, and luckily it's not a lowercase L because that would be a straight dive to zero. It is definitely slowed down to some extent. But I don't think we ought to get overly caught up in the specific growth level. But again, since we're in an age of new normal, we ought to focus on the quality of the growth. And there, those are some still serious challenges based on the data that was released just recently.
What about the general trend? Even looking at the number, you feel it's up L or flat L or going down L? There are just different ways of looking at them.
I would say it's a flat. It's going to be managed to slow down. I mean, in the medium term to long term, the current growth rate actually is still very, very high. And I don't think that can be sustained. Bear in mind, this is a $10 trillion economy, and the labor market is very tight. And we still have a lot of challenges, for example, dealing with overcapacity. So 6.7 is a very, very respectable number. In the medium term to long run, that's why it's going to be an L shape.
But Mr. Xu, there were earlier reports suggesting the way that the GDP number has been collected would be changed to a certain extent. How is that likely to impact today's number?
Well, Statistical Bureau actually is looking into the ways in which calculating new economy, but very few people have experience in doing that. But conceptually, if you think about new economy, for example, sharing economy, actually that means the reduction, less demand for certain products. Example, cars. Young people may not buy cars because they just use Didi. They just use various services. So, so anyway, I think Chinese economy is moving towards a more service-based economy, which really means the traditional calculation of GDP is outdated.
Mr. Kennedy, is it outdated? Can the change be done? If we are changing the way the GDP is being calculated, how can we know where the economy is going compared to the earlier statistics, which were collected in the old way?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the National Bureau of Statistics has engaged in reforms of how they calculate GDP over a long period of time, and to their credit, they've made adjustments along the way as they've been able to do a better survey of activity. The adjustments that they just announced a week ago are also done historically as well, going back many years. So you have comparative data. And basically, I think Xu Sitao is correct that as the economy shifts more towards services, that growth will be better reflected in the data.
Yeah.
But we have the historical data as well to see that trend. So I think it's still helpful information.
All right. If that is the case, let's talk about the specifics. Both of you have been talking about the overcapacity or the necessity for transformation of the Chinese economy. That has been long decided, and yet what about the quality now? And what about the speed of this transformation? Mr. Kennedy, I want some input from you. For example, overcapacity industries such as coal and iron and steel, we understand there were still further investment being put into it coming from banks, the credits. So what do you think the transformation?
I think for the first half of this year, the data reflect that achieving a moderate level of growth has been still the dominant priority, still a higher priority than reducing overcapacity. And if you look at the steel data, you'll see that steel output only declined about 1%. Which is the right direction, but a very teeny drop off of what it really needs to fall off. And I think that's reflected across other sectors as well. And fixed asset investment only grew at 9%, but a lot higher from state companies relative to private. So the rest of the economy is still not getting the signal that restructuring is the dominant focus right now. We've just seen a lot of stimulus in the first half.
Before we talk about the state vis-a-vis the private, let's focus a bit on the types of industries that are in the transformation or should be in the transformation. Mr. Xu, what do you make of it? We have been hearing reports suggesting credits are still being put into some of the industries that actually should be in intensive measures under transformation. What is the situation now?
Well, I think there's a saying, old habit die hard. I think for large banks, they do have a tendency to extend credit to large state-owned companies
because they have
assets, collateral, and even if credit loans didn't turn out to be good, I mean, at least politically, it's safer. So, but again, going back to certain industry, this is the goal. For the next 5 years, we need to bring down overcapacity by roughly 110 million tons. So that's about 12 to 15% of total production, but that's like what 10% of total capacity. So there's a long way to go.
There is a long way to go. At the same time, the so-called new economy and the economy after the transformation is a beautiful picture, but how much it can really contribute in real sense to the GDP and to the real employment opportunities in the country. This is a question mark in China. It's also a question mark in many other economies as well. Mr.
So my answer is, when you talk about new economy, you should just forget about GDP. I think labor market is far more important. And so long as labor market is reasonably healthy, you shouldn't have this obsession with GDP.
After 5 minutes, eventually you showed your true color, Mr. Xu. You're talking about the labor market as the most important element. But what about you, Mr. Kennedy?
You know, I think in the opening clip to this segment, it was mentioned that services represent now about 54% of the economy, and I think that is going in the right direction. But it's what kind of services that matter, that are going to provide productivity growth. I think if we're looking for one place where I would focus, it wouldn't necessarily be in the just look at healthcare and hospitals. Now only less than 20% of hospital beds in China are in private hospitals. If you doubled or tripled that number, you can be darn sure that the level of service, the productivity in healthcare would be much higher. And I think that's the kind of statistic that we ought to be looking for to try and judge how successful restructuring the economy is going.
All right, there has to be a much more sophisticated set of statistics that we should look into. Having said that, though, earlier you both once again mentioned about the state sector and also the private sector. State, of course, more than 28%, and the private is much less than that, not even succeeding the two-digit number. So what do you make of this? Of course, we've been hearing over the past few weeks that even Chinese President Xi Jinping coming out and suggesting the state-owned sector should be very brave and very encouraged to be or continue to be the pillars of the national economy. Mr. Xu, what do you make of these kind of statements? And secondly, where are the state sectors going in terms of the overall general picture?
I think in the very long term, I think a few trends we are going to see. And one trend, for example, we have seen the measures of salary restriction, so on and so forth. Clearly, top-level executive in state-owned sector will be viewed as a senior civil servants. I think that's one trend. The other trend is for large state-owned companies, they will be measured as a rate of returns and not as total assets. But in the short term, maybe holding pattern.
Okay, Mr. Kennedy?
I would agree with what's just been said, and that because of the need to achieve growth, because of the importance of the state-owned sector to critical aspects of the economy as viewed from Xi Jinping and the other leadership, that takes precedence over what some economists would emphasize in terms of liberalization, potential bankruptcy, and that might be required. And it's very challenging times for China. It's very difficult to make these choices because they involve increasing unemployment potentially. So I wouldn't want to be in the leadership's shoes, because in some ways they're between a rock and a hard place right now.
That's true. Before we go, very briefly from you. You know, gentlemen, just now, over the past 10 minutes, we've been talking about the Chinese economy as if we were talking about the Chinese economy 2 years ago. So many are questioning, should we still examine our economies, including that of China, in the same lens as we did before? Or rather, there should be a paradigm change of lenses that we look at our economy. What do you make of it? Mr. Kennedy, first go to you. Very briefly.
I would agree. I think we need measures that are about productivity and quality growth, and not these gross measures of nominal growth or even overall real GDP growth. And it would be nice if the National Bureau of Statistics would provide data on as regular a basis as they provide these general data, with data related to productivity. And I think if we did that, then we'd be able to have a conversation about what the transformation looks like, rather than these input numbers or gross output, which really don't get to the goals that China really needs to achieve for sustainable long-term growth.
Well, it seems that you're putting a lot of pressure on the National Bureaus of Statistics. Well, what about you, Mr. Xu, very briefly?
Just very briefly, I think this economy is undergoing tremendous transformation, and I think we need to find signals, indicators which will tell us where economy is heading to rather than what has already happened.
All right, great ideas. We'll see whether that's going to happen. Thank you so much. Xu Sitao here in Beijing with us, and in Washington, D.C., Scott Kennedy. Appreciate it, gentlemen, for being with us. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us here on World Inside. We've got our final segment coming. We sit down with movie investor Deng Feng to hear about the challenges he and many others faced in finding the right team and talents to create the new animation hit, Rock Dog, the Chinese animation movie. Welcome back. Last year, China overtook Japan to become the second largest film market after the United States, with box office receipts of about 17 billion yuan or 2.8 billion US dollars. Young Chinese with cash to spare are eager for good entertainment, and films have become central to China's social and even dating life. However, animation has long been a very weak spot for China's film industry. Now a Chinese rock star is trying to challenge that and change that by making an animated film for the global audience with Hollywood's help. Zheng Jun helmed the Rock Dog based on a popular namesake comic book series he created and published in the year 2009, and there is an angel investor behind him.
Bodhi here is next in line to be the village guard.
You're late! Sorry, Dad.
Rock Dog tells the story of a Tibetan mastiff named Bodhi who grew up in a village at the foot of the Himalayas. Born to be a guard, he became interested in rock music and begins to pursue his dream.
Dad says stop. Don't stop.
Different from traditional animations, this film incorporates China's rock and roll elements as well as Tibetan culture. It is based on the popular Chinese graphic novel Tibetan Rock Dog, written and illustrated by Zheng Jun, who was also one of China's first major rock stars in the mid-1990s. Although it had originated in China, the film was directed by Ash Brennan, who co-directed Pixar's smash hit Toy Story 2 in 1999, animated by Real FX, an award-winning American digital studio. Its English version is dubbed by a number of Hollywood veterans, including Oscar-winning actor J.K. Simmons. While some say animation has long been seen as a weak point in China's film industry in the face of fierce competition from Hollywood, others say the contents based on Chinese culture would help raise worldwide curiosity.
Dad, if you could feel what I'm feeling, it's the answer to the question.
Rock Dog is considered as an unprecedented experiment which might well provide a new path for China's fast-growing movie industry.
Come on in, man. Don't step on the welcome mat, and don't touch the door. It's electrified.
It's music, which I myself...
Are you a rock and roll guy?
Not exactly, but I like music.
And your generation...
I played guitar when I was at school.
Oh, you were? Okay. How were you?
It's okay. I would say that I didn't use it to, like...
Enough to attract eyeballs, right?
But I didn't use that to attract my girlfriend back then.
Anyway, that was the generation when Chinese rock and roll just started, isn't it? Back in the 1980s.
Yeah, definitely. But I would say that, music, especially rock and roll, in Tibet is another thing, and dog. Putting these things together, I think it's a very good story.
As an angel investor, you're quite well known here in China. But I understand this is your first time to invest in a movie. Why? What you have learned through this zigzagging journey?
Chinese, box office has grown a lot in the last 10 years, I'd say, after I came to China. But there's one exception, which is animation movie. Right? There are a lot of animation movie lovers in China, but if you look at the dominant animation movies in China, is Hollywood movie. So how come the Chinese, for example, feature film has grown a lot? But if you look at the box office, right, the Chinese-made animation movie is such a small fraction of it. So that's actually made me thinking, what's the problem? film.
So you want to do an experiment?
I think as an investor, I realized at that time, very high risk. But because I use my own money, and I feel this is something that for fun, right?
Right.
So, and I also developed we did actually some market research about, this is a small budget animation movie, right? What is the potential return? And how much money we're going to spend to have this pre-production, production, where we're going to get this money, right? And we found out, yes, the risk is high, but still there's a chance to make this happen. On the other side, I really, really love doing experiment. As an angel investor or as a VC, right, we do, I'm an early stage venture capitalist. So we try to do something nobody has done. So this is definitely the thing that nobody has tried before, which is making a animation movie that target the global market, not just the China market.
Why did it take 6 years?
We spent probably, I would say, 3 years in Hollywood, try to find the right production team, which includes, for example, the writer, the director, and a lot of different, like the production, the whole production team as well.
How did you find them? Because this is really the first time that we're talking about.
Yeah. We actually, initially, we don't know where to get them. So we, find the first few people through, I would say that our friends there, and they are on the A-list of writers and directors. We thought, okay, since they're on the A-list, which is the top tier, right, writers and directors, they must be good. After we wrote the first script, we found out, okay, doesn't look like this is the right team.
How come not?
Actually, at the end, we found out part of the problem is ourselves, right? For example, Zhangao, the Tibetan dog. In China, people feel that one of the characteristics of Zhangao is loyalty, right? Loyal to the family, loyal to the people, right? But in U.S., when you try to translate it into the value system that applies to the whole world, the world market we're talking about, right? Loyalty is not necessarily loyal to your master, right? It's more loyal to, I would say, truth, right? So, for example, there's a Chinese character, Sun Wukong, Chinese.
The Monkey King.
Monkey King, right? He actually has very strong loyalty to his master, right, Tang Seng. But in Hollywood, when a Chinese writer tried to get it modified in Hollywood, he ran into the huge problem because the Hollywood writer couldn't understand why. Even if his master made such a mistake, right, he has to basically show his loyalty to his master. And that's definitely wrong in the Western world. So how do you make it a movie that can apply to the whole world? So we have to change a little bit. Like the Hollywood animation movie talk about love, different type of love, right? Like the parent love the children and animals. It has the same thing, right? And also talk about the growth, right? And also you have to add a lot of humor into it. It wasn't in the original book. So that's why we changed and we let them understand what is the Tibetan culture. We need to have the writers wrote those Tibetan culture, embedded into the movie, right? But on the other side, we also need to understand, okay, this is, we need to change.
Did you regret that you haven't got the first A-listers in a way? Because it was you also that needs to be changed, not necessarily just them.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is the tuition we need to pay.
Was it painful?
It's painful because it's lengthy, but on the other side, I think we pretty much, at the very beginning, we thought we understand this, but it turned out that it's longer than we thought. We thought, okay, maybe we spend half a year to figure it out, but it turned out we spent almost 3 years.
So then you went to the next round to look for the Hollywood talents to help you guys.
Well, it's several rounds. It's not just
oh my God.
2 rounds, it's several rounds, right? So that's one side. And the other side is you have to be very careful to sign the contract with these, whether it's writers or directors, because there are a lot of rules in Hollywood, or especially the rules for the animation movie industry is quite different than what's in China. So for example, if you have a writer, you sign the contract, later on if you try to change another writer, it's not easy. The new writer has to change the original content by at least 1/3. Who's going to define whether it's 1/3, less than 1/3, or greater than 1/3? That's tough, right? There is only one court in the universal city, and only one judge can do this. Everyone actually recognize his, ruling.
Judgment.
His judgment. Yeah, everyone would listen and actually think his judgment is right. So that's actually a industry rule. Right?
Did you make a few mistakes?
We luckily we didn't make any big mistakes. So we didn't run into trouble that we couldn't change a writer or something. And the way also how we're going to sign the contract. The good side of it actually, there's not a lot of things that under the table. So once we see, for example, like salaries or these things, they're very transparent. So we could actually look at it and this industry standard.
Right.
So on one side, I would say there are a lot of things we need to learn, but on the other side, it's pretty transparent.
That is the angel investor Deng Feng behind the Chinese animation movie Rock Dog. He not only talked about the challenges working with Hollywood, but also getting China-made animation movie enough screening in the Chinese theaters back at home. Let's take a look at this. So there's one thing that has been quite attracting attention. That is whether this movie, Tibetan Rock Dog, has been having equal opportunity screened in major theaters across China.
Today, what I saw in the last couple of days, the quality of the movie is now proportional to the number of screenings. Our investment is for the production of this movie, but the release and distribution, there are a lot of, I would say, the tricks, right, in this whole process, right? And if you look at the box office, it's not determined by the quality of the movie, by how you're gonna make sure how many theaters will have your movie on the screen. Sometimes, of course, it's because of the financial returns for those theaters, right? But sometimes also there are a lot of things under the table. That's what I saw and what I heard, right? Which I think sacrifice some of the interest of the audience because they want to see the high quality movie. So of course, I want this whole thing to be more transparent.
Will it be better, you think, in the near future?
I don't think for each individual movie you can change the whole industry, but I think the environment needs to be better, and a lot of basically the industry and the government need to do something together.
It sounds like you really want to have some rock and roll spirit.
That's true.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From Yi Tianwei and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night and have a great weekend.